This is The Convergence.
Hi, everybody. Hey, I wanted to do a special recording today because of all the market volatility that's going around when it comes to cryptocurrencies. As many of you know, this show is really about education. We're not here to give you investment advice. We're not here to talk about what you should be putting your money into. What we're trying to do is educate everybody a little bit about what's happening in the marketplaces so that we better understand what's going on. I've had a lot of questions in the last week from people. I just came from a breakfast this morning where I was speaking, and afterwards people came up to me and said, what should I be putting and I'm like, I don't have any idea. All I know is that there's a lot of market volatility right now. You have geopolitical unrest. You've got economic factors that are looking poorly. You've got a labor market that's in a lot of flux. There's a lot of things happening. And although I think many of the early promoters of cryptocurrencies were like, oh, they're inflation proof. Oh, they're resistant to recession, all those kind of things. Yeah, I don't know how much of that was really true. I think we're seeing right now that all currencies, all commodities can be affected by market conditions. But again, that's not really the point of this show. The point of this show isn't to talk about what cryptocurrency to buy. It's to help understand the utility of blockchain technology as a whole and what Web 3.0 can potentially do to the marketplace going forward. We're talking about innovations. We're talking about thinking about markets differently. There were lots of crashes in the tech industry. We all probably remember that .com bubble that burst in the 90s. And a lot of people said, tech stocks are dead and it'll never come back. Well, even some of the foremost economic voices out there said the internet's over. It's not. If you're listening to this, if you're watching this video, we're using that technology right now. So I don't want people to get alarmed. I don't think it's a time to be an alarmist. Certainly, if you put a lot of money into the cryptocurrencies, you're in a bumpy ride. I have a little bit in there myself. It's been a bumpy ride, but just like my 401k, I'm not looking at it very much because I understand there are fluctuations in the market. So I want to make sure that the listeners of this show understand that there might be a little flash in the pan for some aspects of the market, but that's not the case of blockchain, NFTs, tokens, DAOs, all the things that we're talking about. So I just wanted to set that record straight. If you have questions about crypto, don't call me. I don't know. But if you have questions about things like DAO and how these technologies are going to radically affect the future of work and the way that our markets and economy work, that's the kind of stuff that we want to talk about. So I wanted to do this little update just so that we got that word out there. But I wanted to push this out because I think it's important that everybody understands this is a short-term thing that's happening right now. This show is about the long game, understanding where these technologies come into play in the marketplace of the future. Hey, everybody. Welcome to The Convergence, where every week we talk about Web 3.0 and the convergence of that and corporate sustainability, which is what my background has been in. We actually met here just recently. I guess that was 2 or 3 weeks ago at Jay Pierce, who we have 2 of his paintings up here in my office today. We met at Jay Pierce's NFT event and just got to talking about all things NFT and blockchain. And you've got a pretty extensive background in this, Nick. It's not like me where I'm trying to learn as I go. You've been doing this for a while.
It actually, my background in blockchain goes back to about 2012.
Wow.
And I had a roommate who was really into blockchain. Well, he wasn't my roommate at first. I became his roommate because he was trying to drag me into his blockchain project. And I was dragged in kicking and screaming, honestly.
Yeah.
At that time, Bitcoin was, a gimmick, and everyone was waiting for this thing to collapse, and we're just waiting for some hacker to come along and destroy the network.
Yeah.
So I mined some Bitcoin like a lot of people, and then just tossed it off, unfortunately. But it was, nobody knew anything would come of it.
Right.
And so I was at the time I was working as in e-commerce, which is what I've been doing for almost 20 years.
Okay.
Basically setting up stores for people online. And one of the things that I noticed while I was setting up stores was that we would get products from like China or a wholesaler, and someone would have to sit there, and early in my career, this would always be me. Somebody would have to sit there and type all this information into the computer.
Oh, right.
From the wholesaler, even though the wholesaler had it all already on their website.
Yeah,
and
sure.
you would copy all this information from somebody else's website and put it into your system. And they probably copied it from the manufacturer's website.
Yeah.
So you have this redundancy of like, there's a guy sitting in a warehouse back room someplace on a computer, redundantly doing this act over and over all over around the world, when this data just exists. So I wanted to create a company that was an intermediary company that basically shared that data between all the interested parties.
Oh, interesting.
So that was what I was doing before blockchain.
Okay. And were you like scraping the data, or were you just creating a centralized database and distributing out from there?
I was creating a centralized database that people could enter in data, and then the next guy could come along and reference that data and then pull it into their SQL database or whatever.
Nice.
So, that has nothing to do with blockchain necessarily at the time. But then I had this roommate who wanted me to get into blockchain, and then he pulled me into this project called Skycoin, which is like now infamous.
Okay.
So Skycoin was one of the first blockchain projects that had to do with like sharing internet, and it was like started before Ethereum and before a lot of these other things, and like it ended up, it was started off really positive, but it ended up like with the founder, who was my roommate for a time, moving to China and like getting kidnapped at one point.
Oh, jeez.
He was like, at one point he was hanging out on a boat in the Caribbean with John McAfee shooting a machine gun.
That sounds like John McAfee. I mean, everybody sort of has a John McAfee story, shooting machine guns in the middle of the ocean. I think that's sort of the standard.
That's like coffee for John McAfee. He's like, come over and shoot a machine gun on my boat in the ocean.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So that all happened with Sky. I was well out of that project by the time all that stuff was going down. Interestingly, John McAfee has a Skycoin tattoo, or had a Skycoin tattoo, huge, all over the back of his back.
Crazy.
Yeah, and that was the logo I designed. I designed that logo.
So you designed a McAfee's tattoo.
I designed John McAfee's.
I don't see that on your LinkedIn, but I would probably put that right at the top. I'd have the the whole. That's amazing.
Be on the website on the menu bar. So yeah, that was that. So I got like introduced to blockchain through this eccentric roommate of mine who was a friend. I mean, he was really cool. Sure. So I just did the front end. I didn't really know much about how the like internals of blockchain worked or anything at the time. And since he sort of like got me into it, because he was like, oh, this is like the new world, and like everybody's going to make money this way, and he really convinced me of it. And I dug into it, and I thought, well, maybe this would be perfect for what I'm doing, which is like this intermediary sort of place for people to see product data. I was thinking like, this would be a perfect place to put it because it lives in between all the companies, right? So I was like, well, how am I going to move? Like, if I'm going to move my product to this idea, how am I going to do this? And then I started exploring Ethereum in like 2016 and 2017. I started exploring Ethereum, how to do this. And what I ended up doing was creating a new format for a new smart. I taught myself smart contracts.
Okay.
Very, very difficult. Smart contract programming is like a mind F. It is. It is.
And why is that? Maybe you can give us a little bit more insight into smart contracts, because that's something I think when I hear guys like Mark Cuban talk about Web 3.0, they talk about smart contracts. They don't talk about NFTs. They talk about that sort of underlying, that transactional piece and how that can change the world. Maybe you could give a little insight there.
Yeah. So a smart contract is a little bit of a misnomer, and a lot of the people who work with it agree with that, because it's not really a contract as so much as it's just a program. The same way that you would run a program almost on any other system or computer in the world. It's just got a start function. You start running it. It runs through line by line, executes some code. And then that's the first run. And then after it's executed, it lives on the blockchain, just kind of sitting there doing nothing until someone wants to come along and call one of the functions that's in your program. And it can do anything that like a normal software can do. So it can like do math, it can do save data, or it can parse strings or stuff like that. The only difference between a blockchain program and a normal program is that it has a couple extra functions, and those functions are that it can send Ethereum, and it can create addresses.
But that's enough to change everything.
Well, you could say, oh yeah, I could send tokens, but tokens don't really exist.
Yeah, of course.
So tokens are just a piece of memory space in the smart contract that we call a token. So like you create this entry in data in your smart contract that's like a token ID, and then you say this person owns it, and you save the owner in one place, and then you save the ID like maybe next to the owner, and now you call that a token. But it doesn't like live outside the smart contract.
I see.
It lives in the data that's reserved for that smart contract, and it doesn't like actually, like if the smart contract didn't exist, the token wouldn't exist. So
okay, I think I get it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Software that can do things like it can keep track of time. So you can say that a certain amount of Ethereum is locked for a certain amount of time, or some of these tokens that you created are locked for a year, and then they'll be released after a year. It can check who the sender is. So that's kind of a different thing that it can do.
Yeah,
it can
sure.
check who's calling. Yeah, it can check who's calling the current code. So if somebody's like trying to execute a function on that piece of software, it can say, well, who's trying to execute this? And it can tell, like, if you send Ethereum, that's another thing it can do. It can hold Ethereum in itself. So it can hold,
because it's just data in the contract. It's not an actual token. Going back to your original point.
So yeah, so basically, well, it's a function that you wouldn't have in any other software on any other system, because other systems don't have like this root cryptocurrency that lives in the system. So it can keep Ethereum in itself, and then it can send that Ethereum out, or it can keep it like locked away inside of itself. So with just those very basic elements, you can do all kinds of things. Like you can create arbitrage, you can create escrows, you can have like multiple parties be involved in a wallet, so that like two of them have to agree to releasing the funds before all funds are released. So people call it a contract because you can codify these rules to this kind of this economics.
Yeah.
But like the way that it's a misnomer is that in a legal contract, you have like all sorts of other non-financial rules that you would have,
right?
And there's some human element of like, well, if so and so reneges on the contract, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Like in a smart contract, it's only solely limited to these financial rules. There's no room for mistakes, and there's no room for somebody to come in and fix things unless you create like a back door, and then that voids the
yeah, right.
Anyway, so calling it like a smart contract isn't as, maybe it should be called like a smart wallet. That might be like a
better definition. Well, and I think that's the challenge, is we're trying to apply existing financial systems terminology. You talked about arbitrage, you talked about escrow, those kind of things. We're applying those that mean something very, very specific in the financial field, and we're applying it to something that does something very similar, but maybe not exactly that same thing.
Yeah, right. And so it's leading to a lot of confusion. And
Hence the reason I started this podcast, because everybody I know is like, I don't get it, bro. Like, I just don't. And, I just got off this last call I told you a little bit about, before, and with Michael Moyo, who created the NASDAQ Global Sustainability Index, and hearing there was like 2 or 3 times I was just dumbfounded for like 30 seconds. I couldn't say anything because he's explaining something. And I'm like, I could completely see how that changes the whole world. But how do we not understand? How does so few people understand this right now? It's a little problematic. It really is.
It is, and one of the issues is that there's a lot of people that are charging forward really fast and thinking that like sort of the NFT technology is already sort of a solved problem. And they say, well, we've got Solana NFTs. They're cheap enough for us, so we're just going to make like a bunch of Solana NFTs. But they don't like understand like the limitations of Solana, for instance, or Solana NFTs. So they're just looking for whatever the cheapest solution is for their problem. But they don't even necessarily understand what an NFT is.
So I want to talk with you for a few moments about Evergreen Carbon Credits, one of the sponsors of this show. I started working with Evergreen when I was telling a friend of mine who's involved with that company about my efforts to try to learn more about blockchain, NFTs, crypto, all the things in this space. And he showed me Evergreen. Evergreen was a really unique solution. I've looked at carbon credits in the past. I've been in the sustainability industry for almost 15 years. I understood what they were. You were buying an offset to offset the carbon footprint that you or your company has. But I also understood the challenges with that. They're sold in very, very large blocks, and then people break those blocks up and try to sell individual credits or small clusters of credits to businesses. And that creates some room for fraud, for people to not be up and up on what that project is, if that carbon credit is real. And there's challenges with that. And you can Google it right now and find there's a big case in Europe going on about fraudulent carbon credits. But what Evergreen did, I thought, was really unique. They took this idea of NFTs and they took blocks of carbon credits and broke those things down into tens of thousands or even millions of individual carbon credits. They can actually fraction those even out to 1/10 of a carbon credit if they needed to. And they were able to then create a smart contract around that carbon credit so that you can track it back to its origin. You can find out what project it was associated with, but you are also guaranteed that the carbon credits you're getting from Evergreen are the real deal. You get that certificate, you get that certification that only the blockchain can do. So that's why it made sense for them to come on as a sponsor of this show. We're talking about all this new technology, and with new technology comes higher energy usages in some senses. And Evergreen is here to help offset that. If you want to look to maybe improve your image in the marketplace, maybe you're looking to offset some of your carbon footprint, not even just for your image, but actually for the sake of the planet, head on over to evergreencarboncredits.com and check out what they do. You can buy credits for as little as $11, and you'll get the certificate and the NFT that you can put in your wallet that shows that you've actually made that contribution. And that money, particularly right now with the projects they're working on, is going to reforestation in the Amazon. I think that's something we can all really get behind, particularly when we understand that the environment, the climate we're all connected to it. It doesn't matter if we're putting off emissions here in the US or if it's happening in Mexico. It all contributes to the same global problem. So why not be part of a global solution with Evergreen Carbon Credits? Well, that's a great, let me step back on that a minute, because I wanted to talk about Ethereum being the underpinning of these NFTs. So, we hear about crypto and we hear about Bitcoin and we see Ethereum traded right beside it, but they're actually two very different things in their utility. Is that right? The utility of them is different.
Yeah. So the way that I like to think of it is that a fungible token is the currency. Right. Mm-hmm. And then a non-fungible token is everything you buy with the currency.
Oh, that's such a great explanation. I wish I would have asked you this a month ago.
It's like an algebra equation. It's like non-fungible and fungible equals 0 or something.
Well, I failed algebra terribly. So this is why I haven't. So the non-fungible is the commodity, the thing that's being traded, and the fungible is the currency.
The other one. Yeah, no, that's right. You got it right.
Yeah. Okay, I was going to say, now you really got me. Okay, now this is good to know, because I didn't I think I've been talking about it and not completely understanding that.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt that, but Ethereum's utility is more of this underpinning of these contracts, right?
Right. Ethereum has the best environment for these smart contracts and creating this kind of code on the blockchain. It has really great developer tools. So, and it's really flexible. So, and it's created a lot of tools that allow other people and companies to interact with each other in a community standards way, so they can all sort of like railroad tracks. Everybody has the same standards that they live by, so that all their smart contracts can talk to each other. And that's really important. And development tools are really important. So developers want to actually use the code and work on the system. So Ethereum has those things. And then it also has longevity, because so two really important things about NFTs are that that some people think that decentralization is really important. I happen to be one of the people who thinks that decentralization is fairly important. And the other thing is longevity, and those two things are related, because if a blockchain is going to survive, because one of the interesting things about this technology is people are thinking about it as sort of a link to the future, as something that they can pass down, as something that's going to last. And they're going to make this NFT, or they're going to get this NFT, and maybe their grandchildren will be able to inherit this NFT.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be making an NFT on one of these other blockchains that just sprung up overnight and is managed by like one company, then is that NFT going to be around in 100? The only one that like the best bet that you could bet on right now is Ethereum for that longevity. That you would think that it's going to last, if you were going to say what blockchain is going to last 100 years, it'd be like 75% of people would say Ethereum.
Yeah. And is that just because it's become sort of the standard for these contracts, and it's the majority of them are written in that right now?
It's really about decentralization for Ethereum. It's about the number of miners and people like participating in the underlying network and the distribution of those people around the world.
That makes some sense. Now, let me ask you a question on Ethereum, and I don't know if you'll have the answer to this, but I just recently found out that there's only 21 million Bitcoin, right? And once that hits that number, there's no more. Is that the same with Ethereum? Is there a limit to the size of the marketplace?
So Ethereum has just changed the way that they operate, actually.
Yeah. I've heard this in the last one. We were talking about proof of work versus proof of what was it? We went through the whole thing on the last episode. It was very interesting.
Yes, yeah. It's a proof of stake.
Yeah, proof of stake. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and it's not only that, but they are now burning Ethereum in order to continue operations. So they have become a deflationary currency at this point.
I see. So they're burning Ethereum as part of this process. Okay, that makes sense. So can you still mine Ethereum?
You can still get mining rewards on Ethereum. I don't remember what the mining reward is off the top of my head. But you still get mining rewards on Ethereum. But the goal of Ethereum now, it seems to be that it will be deflationary and it's not going to keep expanding forever. That was a complaint that a lot of people had about Ethereum.
Yeah, I could see that. It becomes a fiat currency then. You can just go print 8 trillion more of them and dump them into the marketplace, which isn't a good thing. Right. As we're seeing with the inflation, it was 8.5% today. A lot of that has to do with, currencies being dumped into the market.
And so like I'm not like an Ethereum like maxi or Ethereum maximalist. Like I'm all for like whatever the best solution is. It's just that for right now, I think Ethereum is pretty much the most decentralized and probably the most long-term bet that you can have.
That makes some sense. And Bitcoin from that perspective just doesn't have the utility to become a currency that can work in this situation. Is that right? I mean, that's one of the reasons Ethereum's trying up.
Yeah. So Ethereum has been developed phenomenally as far as like how it can handle any kind of useful utilitarian purpose. It's basically like there's a project out there called Internet Computer, which is kind of funny because that's what Ethereum is, the first internet computer. It already does that, and it does it really well. When you pay for gas on Ethereum, you pay for conditional statements and computer operator statements like if, else, and you pay for like the kinds of low level operations that your processor does. That's what the gas pays for. So
okay, let's talk about gas, because gas is a new term here, especially in a world where petroleum is so expensive. So what is gas? Is essentially the fee to utilize the currency. Is that right?
It's you pay for the amount of processing that this internet computer has to do. Okay. So like, if you're running an application on your computer and it starts like bogging down, it's doing like a bunch of moving a bunch of zeros and ones around, and it's doing a bunch of conditional statements, and it's saving parts of memory in temporary memory, and it's doing all these operations, and those operations that your computer does at a low level, the Ethereum has to do too. The miners have to do that. So when you're running these software applications that I talked about, which are the smart contracts, they have like statements in there, like if this person has 40 of these tokens, then give them 1 extra token every 10 minutes. And then there will be like there's a series of statements that in order to calculate that, and you'll pay for every single one of those like math operators and subtraction operators and division. And when you run one of those, series of statements in one of these software applications, that goes to the miners, and it says like how exactly how many operations are going to happen, and put a number on each one of those operations, and then tell me what that is, and then that number becomes the gas that you have to pay, and then you have to pay a little bit extra as like a tip, and you say, well, here's the gas, and here's some extra in order for you guys to make some money off it, and that's basically how it works.
That makes sense when you explain it that way. It's the fee for all the processing that happened in there. Now, I know that you're an expert in this stuff. You're probably not an expert in sustainability, but I know even Justin, we were at lunch with him the other day, and he said he was sort of surprised that he got some heat from people about his NFT collections, about the carbon footprint of them. And we've seen a number of sites recently, oddly enough, that have shut down and not launched an NFT collection because they were concerned about the impact. Now, as somebody who's been in sustainability for 15 years, I can talk about that, and I can talk about how that might not be, the correlation might be a little bit off, but there is a lot of processing power that has to go into that, and there's energy that goes into it.
Yeah, and I think one of the really huge pieces of information that most people are missing is that they're looking at the amount of processing power that Bitcoin is doing, and then they're saying, well, Bitcoin processes a lot, so let's see what Ethereum is processing, and then they say, well, Ethereum is processing like a 10th of that or a 50th of that. So, but they still think, well, that's still a really high number. But they're not going to the next step, and the next step is super important. And the next step is that if you look at the top 100 gas users, the top, like, just go to there's Etherscan tools, and you can check who the biggest gas are. And the top like 10 who use up 99% of gas have nothing to do with NFTs.
Interesting.
Nothing to do with NFTs. It's only 1 or 2% of all the traffic on Ethereum has anything to do with NFTs. The rest of them are all ERC20 tokens and DeFi projects and Uniswap. So you have to do 1/100th of the amount of gas that the entire Ethereum network is using before you can actually get the level of energy that NFTs are actually consuming.
Interesting. Well, that's good to know. And that's what, I want to make sure people set the record straight on this. I talked to somebody the other day who had been in the NFT game, and he said, the other thing that people forget is you're thinking about that energy being used right now. You're not calculating that if Justin, he did create these paintings, somebody had to cut down a tree. Yeah, they're pretty good, right? Somebody had to cut down a tree. They had to transport that tree across the world to build a frame, had to make the canvas. They had to pump petroleum out of the ground to make the oil that makes the paint, and then the sealers and all of those things that go along with that. So the overall carbon footprint is probably much more closer to similar. And I've talked to you about this before. One of my sponsors of the show creates NFT carbon credits, right? Because they're like, hey, look, if you do have a beef with it, great, let's offset it. Let's just go through the process of making sure that we offset that, and we can turn it into a carbon negative product versus something that's using, energy up someplace else. Let's use it. Let's use the utility of the NFT and blockchain contracts to actually solve the global warming problem, not contribute to it. And I think that's the cool thing about what this does is it does bring a level of transparency. We were talking on the last show about, what was it? 5 million people in Africa now are bankable because of cryptocurrencies. Where a transaction fee is 30 cents on a Visa and MasterCard, if you only make $1 a day and the transaction fee is 30 cents, you're not getting very far. But with these cryptocurrencies, that changes everything. And I think that's what is exciting is, yes, we're in that interim stage of trying to figure it all out. But I think if people truly understand and begin to adopt the technology, they're going to start to see this is more of a solution than it is a problem.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And if you look into the future a little bit, then you'll see, Ethereum eventually becoming a proof of stake network using a lot less energy. On top of like what I was saying, that NFTs don't use as much electricity as people think that they do. A lot of that I think is kind of become a talking point from a lot of the people who are just kind of negative about NFTs in general. There's a lot of people in the art community who just hate NFTs. Right?
But I think some art ascribes itself very well to it. Justin is a great example, Justin Pierce. There's other artists that are more photorealistic and things that it doesn't apply to them really. And I think they feel like maybe they're being left out of the cold, or the marketplace is trying to dictate to them what their art should look like. And that's not, I've known a lot of artists, you don't do that. You don't say, hey, it would be better if you did a little green. That'll be the last conversation you ever have with that guy or gal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think NFTs are here to like steal food out of anyone's mouth. I think quite the opposite is probably true. Thanks a lot for bringing me on.
Yeah, Nick, this was really great. But it goes to show there's so much to talk about in this marketplace, and I'd love to have you on again too. Let's keep in touch. You've been around, so that's helpful because you sort of know the history of all this too, which I think is really important. People need to have that history recorded so we know where this all came from and where it's going.
Thanks for listening to The Convergence. If you want more information about the topics you've heard here today, reach out to us at theconvergencepodcast.com.